Greetings and salutations, fellow geeks. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Feel free to comment down below. Now let's get into it. Warning, some of this viewer's content is not good for children and even for some adults. Viewer discretion is highly advised.
You're a bad boy, up to no good. Trying to be a man, but you're stuck in boyhood. Baby, you won't ever treat me the way you should. So it's over for good. I will never smile for you, smile for you, smile for you, smile for you. Yeah. I will never cry for you, cry for you, cry for you, cry for you. Oh yeah, yeah. Why do you expect me to when I'm over you? Can't you tell by the look on my face that I will never smile for you, smile for you, smile for you, smile for you?
Welcome back to the beginning of part 3. If this is the first video you're watching of Kendrick's case on my channel, I highly recommend going back to my first and second parts of his case. For part 3, I'm going to initiate it rewinding back to when his body was found because I stumbled across some information that you'd be interested in knowing.
Johnson's who are questioning the investigation. The Loudoun County coroner says the scene was compromised. How so?
Well, first, Anderson, the coroner, Bill Watson, says that law in Georgia is that the coroner is to be called immediately once a body is found. We checked, and that's true. Kendrick's body was found at about 10 a.m. He was called at about 2:45, and he says that once he arrived, the body had been moved. Now, the sheriff's office says that they did nothing wrong on that scene. We also received an email from him a few days after our interview on camera in which he told us that. I want to put up part of the email, Anderson, and he writes in that email, "I would appreciate it if you would destroy this interview with me. I do not want this to be shown whatsoever. I feel that our situation should not be aired." Now, we have aired that interview here on CNN, and of course that request only fueled the skepticism from the Johnsons and their supporters.
Wait, what did you say?
Bill Watson was called to the scene 5 hours after detectives had arrived, although Georgia law requires investigators to call the coroner as soon as a body is found.
I don't know what the county did when they got there on the scene. The body had been moved. The scene, in my opinion, had been compromised.
Hold up. Those are strong fighting words. What do you mean compromised? Let's go over that. First, shout out to all my Asian families out there because I know you know what these are. These are booties, and basically it's common sense, but they protect the area from your shoe or protects your shoe from the area. And one of the first red flags in Kendrick's case was the investigators failed to use these. Ideally, investigators should have a list of materials and or equipment to help analyze the initial evaluation of the crime scene. To be realistic, not every personnel goes by the books, clearly. But booties are just a portion of materials used, which is called PPE, which stands for Personal Protective Equipment. So any detective covering a scene, it is responsible and safer to have PPE on, not only to clearly not contaminate. However, you don't know who this person is. You don't know what kind of chemicals are around the situation, or if this person has any diseases. So it's really to protect you as an individual as well. After a few hours, they cleared the area and started canvassing. They started searching in the bathrooms, in the trash cans, and they came across this. In the girls' bathroom that was connected to the gym, there was a bloody tissue. But a student came forward and claimed it was hers. She explains that the day before she had practice in the gym, and someone accidentally hit her in the face, which caused her nose to bleed, and then she used that to clean it up and just threw it away. Detective John Marion was the one who found the bloody tissue. He was advised to talk to Sarah Merriman. She is a teacher at Hahira Middle School, and she assists the color guard team at Lowndes High School. which happened to be practicing in the old gym the evening of January 10th. She stated she arrived around 6 p.m. and practice went from 6:45 to 8. She said she saw a black male that had glasses and a book bag, but did not describe KJ. And as I researched, I found some discriminating things against John Marion. In late 2015, the Valdosta Times-News reported that he was found guilty for pension fraud. Basically, he was getting paid from New Jersey since he filed disability when he worked as a police officer there. But he moved to Valdosta and worked for the Lowndes County Sheriff's Department and still was getting paid $3,614 a month from New Jersey. He pled guilty and had to serve a year in jail and then pay full restitution for the $321,008 back. After all of that, he did resign. And take that information and do what you want with it. But in my book, that's very unethical. But don't think I forgot to mention that Bill Watson wasn't called until about 3:45 in the afternoon. Now, KJ's body was found around 10:30 in the morning. That's well around 5 to 6 hours later. I wanted to know why. What did you have to say about that? And I came across this. Here is a statement by Sheriff Chris Prine. He was the sheriff at the time of KJ's death. I wanted to read this out loud because I didn't want to butcher it, but you need to hear what he said. And I quote, "It's been kind of an understanding with all of the coroners from the surrounding counties," said Prine. "Rather than sitting there in the parking lot waiting for us to finish, you just call them when you get to the body. And I swear to you, no law enforcement officer touched that body until the coroner got there and examined it." End quote. Okay, well, if he wanted to speak for everyone else, I wanted to find out what they had to say about that. So I did a little research, and there are 5 different counties that surround Lowndes County in Georgia. And as you can see here for a visual, there's Eccles, Lanier, Berrien, Cook, and Brooks County. Each county has an elected coroner. This is Austin Fivash. He is now the Lowndes County coroner. I did call his office, and a woman answered. I spoke with her briefly, and she was able to entertain me a bit. I let her know why I was calling regarding Sheriff Prine's remarks. I gave her my name and my number to give to Austin, but I am yet to hear a response. But I did get 2 other coroners from different counties to comment, and this is what one said. Would you be able to elaborate on if that's the way your county practices, like he said?
Well, I really don't have an input. I just go by Title 45 is what I'll say.
Okay, and what does that say?
Title 45, Georgia Title 45 state law says that anytime a body is discovered, notify the coroner immediately.
Okay, and that's
that don't mean he does. That doesn't mean he has to be on the scene at that time. He just has to be notified, be aware of the situation.
Interesting.
Now, okay, that's just what Title 45 is. That's how I practice.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you for your input. I appreciate it. Have a good day. Well, based on his statement, Sheriff Prine is not correct. But then hear this other coroner's statement from another county. Quoted that the surrounding counties also practice that way, and we're not sure if that's correct, and we just want to hear.
I'm not getting involved with anything with that. As far as I'm concerned, they did absolutely nothing wrong, but I'm not involved with that at all.
Okay, thank you, sir. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too.
Now you kind of get an idea of why I'm so frustrated with KJ's case. There's so many discrepancies and then inconsistencies on top of that. I'm not sure if it's lies or just opinions, but either way, I'm not really sure we'll ever find out. I did call Bill Watson directly, and I haven't heard a response back, and I'm not surprised. But there's so much to KJ's case. We're not even halfway done, so we must carry on. On January 13th, KJ's body was awaiting autopsy at the Georgia Crime Lab. In the incident reports, I read that Kenneth, Kendrick's father, was able to view and identify his son because, well, in the documentary Finding Kendrick Johnson, he states that he was relentless. He needed to see his son and make sure that that was him. The important part of this message is that he stated when they pulled his body out, He was expecting it to be at least a little chilly, if not cold, but instead it was hot. And if not hot, it was definitely warm. And that was alarming to him because he expected it to be cool. Now, I did some research, of course, you know me by now, and bodies are kept in morgues between 14 degrees Fahrenheit and as low as negative 58 degrees Fahrenheit, just by Google searching, but I did deeper searching than that. So I looked into the Los Angeles County Morgue, which is one of the largest morgues in the United States, and they keep theirs as an average 38 degrees Fahrenheit. The spectrum of keeping bodies in the morgue is very broad, literally from frozen solid to trying to keep it from decomp to have it ready in a few days for autopsy. I had to find out for myself, so I went ahead and called even more offices in different states, different counties, just to see who would answer me and to get a better analysis of what's going on here. Let's hear what they said.
I think the fridges are usually set at like 4 degrees Celsius.
Okay. As you can see in the video I just recorded, it was 4 degrees Celsius was converted to 39 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll also add that as I was reading his first autopsy again, I came across an interesting detail that I had to mention. It said room temperature for his body heat. Take that into consideration as well. Not every one of my conversations with the medical examiners and/or coroners that I had spoken to were able to be recorded per state law, or I just didn't have the recording device on me at the time of me answering the phone. So I'll just mention that between 3 other places, they were between 33 degrees Fahrenheit and 40 degrees Fahrenheit. But I finally got a call back from the Macon Medical Examiner's office.
We have a cooler, we just don't store them here. So the coroner would have held on to the body and stored the body until it was ready to come in for the autopsy, and then they would have brought him that morning for the autopsy. We would have done the autopsy, and then they would have come back to get him whenever we were done. So they're only in our cooler for just that, short amount of time.
Okay, give or take a few hours?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, but just to kind of elaborate on that a little bit more, what is the degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit? I can convert it, but do you guys keep it at a specific?
Now, for us, our cooler stays anywhere from 30 to 40 degrees.
Unfortunately, Bill Watson and Austin Five Ash never returned my call, so let's kind of go over for what I can gather. Coroner Bill Watson took Kendrick's body over 2 hours, so it was about 2 hours and 20 minutes of a drive from Valdosta to Macon, Georgia. Now, I did this drive myself, and yeah, it is about 2.5 hours. Now, we're in the South. This is Georgia, and even in January when I went to go visit, it was kind of still warm. It was a little chilly, but still warm. I'm not sure how you want to take Kenneth's statement, whether it was just his experience being under anxiety and pressure because of him mentally, physically, and even spiritually preparing himself for the viewing of his son. Or was it literally something else like he stated, to cover up what really happened to him? But that's for you to decide. January 14th, Lowndes County authorities reported Kendrick's body showed no injuries following the preliminary autopsy results. But KJ's parents didn't take that as an answer. April 25th, 2013 was the first of many rallies conducted for KJ's justice. Unfortunately, Jackie, Kenneth, and 5 other immediate family members of KJ's were arrested at this first rally. Okay, fast forward to 2015 in January. They were all sentenced to 12 months in jail for the blocking of the entrance of the Judicial Wing hallway. However, Judge Mark Mitchell suspended these sentences along with the fines and probation. I can safely speculate that he probably had sympathy for them and didn't want to cause more insult to injury. About a week after KJ's autopsy was performed, Bill Watson, the coroner, released his coroner's report. What was said in this report was very troubling. A lot of people started thinking that KJ's death was a cover-up because of what he had said.
He writes, the investigative climate was very poor to worse when I arrived on the scene. The body had been noticeably moved, the scene had been compromised, and there was no cooperation from law enforcement at the scene. He goes on to say, Anderson, that information necessary for my lawful investigation was withheld. Now, this is one version of the coroner's death investigation report. This is another. This one was sent to us as a result of an open records request from the coroner's office, and it's signed and dated. This copy was given to us in May by the sheriff's office, and again last week as a result of that law enforcement. It does not have the description that I just read, nor is it signed by the coroner. Two versions of the same report.
Wait a minute. I have not heard of that. This is stunning. There are two different versions of the same document, and the official one that the police and others have given you doesn't have any of what the coroner said about compromised crime scenes, about lack of cooperation from law enforcement. It's basically a completely kind of whitewashed version. Is that right?
Exactly.
Oh, Wilbur, what are we going to do about this? I wonder if that's what the Lowndes County Sheriff's Department said to him when they read his report. I have so many questions. When you said his body was moved, do you mean that they moved his body intentionally to compromise the scene, or was it just an accident when his body was being pulled down from the mat to identify him initially? Did they write the second report for you? And why did you retract your statements to CNN? Did CNN twist your words? I can't find the first report anywhere. But if I'm going to fight fair here, I need to highlight something. The news outlets did not mention this part at all, and I'm not sure why, other than it's not in their favor, but I will. And I quote, "Furthermore, the integrity of the evidence bag was compromised on January 13th by opening the sealed bag and exhibiting the dead body to his father." End quote. I know Kenneth had no intentional compromise for his son's case, so I'm sorry that they considered it. But come May 2nd, 2013, the official autopsy report was concluded and released. But most people were not happy about it. And then, case closed.
Lieutenant Stride Jones spoke with CNN in May, the day after the sheriff's office closed its case.
It was not a rash decision that was leapt to by any means. I mean, we've drawn this out, done a thorough investigation, and we think we've covered all bases.
The cause of death was positional asphyxia. He basically smothered himself.
Said it was no foul play. He had no bruises, no nothing.
Did you believe that?
No.
And you still don't believe it?
No, I don't.
How can something be so simple, yet complex? How can someone take one thing and then turn it into another? That did not sit well with the Johnsons and many other families across America and even worldwide. You bet your ass they stood up. And then the KJ movement was born.
But you don't wanna talk about it. Talk about it. Talk about it. You don't wanna talk about it. Try to take it slow, but you never had a low speed. Ay. And I've been feeling cold, thinking about the old me. Yeah, I'm out of my head, trying to deal with my emotions. I know what I felt when we dove into the sheets. Wish I would've known, I wish you would've told me. But you don't wanna talk about it. Talk about it.
Nowhere. My baby life matter.
There's a saying, hell hath no fury for a woman scorned. And yeah, that's pretty true because I'm a woman. But imagine a mother being scorned. In June, right after the first autopsy was released, his parents requested his body to be exhumed for an independent autopsy. They hired Dr. William Anderson to do the second autopsy. They took his body all the way to Central Florida, in a little suburb outside Orlando called Heathrow. They figured they would find certain things wrong, but what they didn't expect was to find things missing.
We got the body for the second autopsy. That organs, the heart, lungs, liver, etc., were not with the body.
The brain?
The brain, they were all absent.
Wait, what?
I'm not sure at this point who did not return the organs to the body, but I know when we got the body, the organs were not there.
What was in the place of the organs?
Newspaper.
When we buried Kendrick, we thought we was burying Kendrick, not half of Kendrick.
Oh dear. All right, this is not okay. I've never heard of this, and I don't know of anyone else that has either. But what I do know is during an autopsy, all the organs are weighed. Then they are placed in a bag, and they call this bag the viscera. And these consist of the brain, even the tongue, the pleural cavity, which is the lungs, even the heart, all the digestive tract, excretory, and even the reproductive system. There's some certain questions that arise, which clearly, what happened to his organs and why? Did they get rid of him because they knew that they would want another autopsy and try to cover up any tracks? It's a valid question. Most news outlets will tell you that there were only 2 entities that had possession of his body, but in reality, there were 4. In order to find this out, we needed to backtrack and find out who had access. And these parties include as followed: the Valdosta Lowndes Regional Crime Lab, the GBI, a third-party transport company, and the Harrington Funeral Home. Okay, so let's go over for what I can gather. Coroner Bill Watson contacted Steve Owens. He owns a transport company that helps transfer medical supplies and bodies. I know what you're probably thinking. What? Some random guy just gets called to take access to his body? But he's kind of not, because he's a retired police officer that started his own gig. Bill Watson, the coroner, is very familiar with Steve, and they've worked for many years together. He actually takes the bodies all the way to Macon, Georgia, whenever they need autopsies, and he's a pretty penny, apparently. And in the coroner's request, he's listed under professional services. He took Kendrick's body to the Valdosta Lowndes Crime Lab. Kendrick's body would be here at the lab from the evening of January 11th to the early morning of January 14th. On January 14th, Steve was also utilized for his services to pick up his body and deliver it all the way to Macon, Georgia. Kendrick would have his autopsy performed. Then Steve would pick him up from the GBI in Macon and deliver his body all the way down to Valdosta to the Harrington Funeral Home. I've read several articles, but they all state the same thing. It's basically a he said, she said. The GBI, as standard protocol, stated that they put his organs back with his body. But then Harrington Funeral Home stated that they never received the organs with his body. So which is it? And finally, after hours beyond hours reading on every article regarding this topic alone, just on his organs being missing, I finally found this. And I'll read. But Lowndes County Coroner Bill Watson said many of Johnson's organs were deemed too badly decomposed to be preserved and had to be disposed of before the body was sent to the funeral home. In quote, it would have been during or immediately after the autopsy, he said. I want to emphasize this part of his case because it's a very slippery slope. I've read a lot of conspiracy theories since before they thought that they were missing, and a lot of people thought that the black market selling organs was what happened to his. And I'm not gonna say and be naive that it doesn't happen, because it definitely does. It is a thing. But I know some people will want to think this no matter what I say. so I'll just bring this up. Transplanting organs is a very difficult and organized crime in the first place. It has to be done in a specific manner and time. Depending on what organ depends on how long it can live before the transplant, but as little as 4 hours up to 36. The most popular transplants are the liver, kidneys, heart, pancreas, and lungs. On top of that, the liver and the kidneys are the most valued and high demand. On average, 12 people die each day in the US just awaiting for a healthy transplant that matches. I've read that the heart itself can go up to $1 million. The liver comes in second at an average $557,000. Each kidney can go for about $250,000, and even eyes go for about $1,500 each. Now that we went through all of that, let's go through one more thing to make sure and debunk that his organs were not sold in the black market. The first autopsy report done in Macon by Marianne Gaffney Kraft clears it up altogether. She's very detailed and notes down even little things such as the headphones that were found with his body. But as you continue reading, it states in the internal examination, all body organs are present and in their normal anatomical positions. She also notes several places in the report that there are decomposition within the body. So there you have it. You either have a really bad thief that, if that was the true motive, doesn't know how to steal organs and it was all done in vain, or if they stole his organs after the autopsy was performed, somebody's probably not doing well with organs that were already going through decomp. So go check on your friend. All right, we got that out of the way, but we still need to talk about the newspaper. I've called Harrington Funeral myself to see what they had to say about several things, but good luck with that. Even Victor Blackwell from CNN got the door shut on him, but they're just really sensitive to anything that has regarding KJ's case because their name was dragged through the mud. While I was reviewing their Google reviews for the business, I figured I would see at least a few Justice for KJ reviews, but I was taken back. Their Google reviews were inundated with bad reviews regarding KJ's case. I would say it was about a 10-to-1 ratio. So there was about 10 people would comment about KJ and how they handled his body and his organs were missing and that they sold them and how bad they were. And then there would be like one review that actually knew them and utilized them and tried to resurrect their name. When I called them, they did not want to answer any questions. So I'll just ask them here. I understand you did the Johnsons a solid by donating your services freely at no charge. So were you trying to cut corners? But even so, even if they did compensate you for your services, why wouldn't you have disclosed this information to the family on how you were to present his body? How often do you receive bodies to the funeral home without the viscera? And are you using more appropriate materials today, or are you still practicing like that? I wanted to share something that I found, well, I guess didn't find, but I was looking at their website. I was curious what Kendrick's obituary said and looked like, so I searched for his, but there's nothing. I'm not sure if it's just their way of record keeping and getting rid of certain history based on how many years it's been on to make room for other new obituaries. However, I would not be surprised if it's a passive-aggressive low blow to the Johnsons. But let's carry on. As I was researching about this subject regarding his organs, filling his body with newspaper, I wanted to learn more about that. The only time a body is delivered to the funeral home with the viscera is when it has been autopsied. Otherwise, there would be no real good reason why anyone would take their organs out and then replace them back. Because the autopsy removes some of that fluid, so there will be empty spaces in between the cavity, and they need somehow to fill that. And there's different ways they can do it. Most modern funeral directors will use a type of cotton. It packs well, can be shaped easily, and it's very absorbent. Another popular material is sawdust, also known as wood shavings. but even more professionally known as Excelsior. I'm sorry I went so deep into this part. I just really wanted to understand what happened because I didn't know that this was a thing, putting materials in a body after an autopsy, and it's felt so disrespectful, and I just needed to find more meaning to the madness. The Johnsons did try to sue Harrington Funeral Home, but were unsuccessful, since apparently it's not illegal to use newspaper for preparations. But it is definitely frowned upon, so I hope they're not practicing like that today. Because if they're doing that, what else are they doing? But let's carry on. Now, August 15th, 2013, Dr. William Anderson finally concludes and releases his autopsy report. Are you ready? The moment we've all been waiting for. Do you see this? Are you reading the same report? Do you see blunt force trauma to the right neck? And blunt force trauma to the right thorax? What? So our suspicions were right. I'm sure everyone was probably sitting down as they were reading it and then just jumped right out of their chair right after. Okay, let's read even more as I continue. Cause of death, blunt force trauma, right neck, involving right mandible and soft tissues, including the area of the carotid body, consistent with inflicted injury. Unexplained, apparent, non-accidental. He even notes that a further investigation is indicated to determine the etiology of the injuries. And you're probably asking yourself the same question we all did. How come he found this, but the other pathologists didn't? And who is Dr. William Anderson? Let's go over all this. On September 9th, a month after his second autopsy report was released showing he not only had injuries, but that it was also inflicted by another person, the Johnson family requested Kendrick's case be reopened with a formal, more instituted homicide investigation. U.S. Attorney Michael Moore says it best.
The opinion that a sufficient basis exists for my office to conduct a formal review of the facts and investigation surrounding the death of Kendrick Johnson.
Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson and their attorney spoke with CNN's Wolf Blitzer moments after the announcement.
I believe, indeed, that he was murdered.
Do you have any idea who may have murdered him?
No, I don't. That's what we wanted to get down to the truth.
Just to be clear, the Johnsons also sued to have a coroner's inquest. What's a coroner's inquest, you ask? I'm so glad you inquired. It's basically the coroner doing his own independent investigation. So, if a jury decides to change the cause of death from accidental to homicide, then it is forwarded to the district attorney's office to have a local investigation as well. This was the end goal for the Johnsons for the coroner's inquest. However, Senior Judge Joe Bishop denied the Johnsons' request, and that was done for a few reasons actually. In 2016, Bill Watson, the coroner at the time of KJ's death, had retired. And as I've mentioned before, Austin Fivash is now the Lowndes County coroner. And on top of all of that, there's also the 5-year rule. You see, the Johnsons did put their initial request for the coroner's inquest back in 2013. But for what I understand, Bill Watson did not want to comply. So with further requests, they're trying to force Bill Watson to do the inquest. But by now, he's already retired, and it's been over 5 years. But if you think that setback would keep the Johnsons from seeking answers, you're very wrong.
Justice for KJ is coming!
Just when I thought we were getting more answers, I was riddled with more questions. I was very curious to see what Dr. Marianne Gaffney Kraft had to say about Dr. Anderson's second report. Though I didn't find anything from her directly, I did find this.
Supervised the autopsy that was conducted in Macon by Dr. Gaffney Kraft, and I have personally reviewed her findings, reviewed the case completely, and I'm acquainted quite well with the investigative findings surrounding the death of this young man.
Is it possible Kendrick Johnson's death was a homicide?
No, it is not.
You'd stake your reputation on that.
I stake my reputation on the findings that the doctors in my office find every single day. So this particular case is actually no exception. Yes, I stake my reputation on this.
The family commissioned an independent review.
Yes.
You've reviewed the review.
Oh, yes.
And?
The review is woefully inadequate. The report is really inconclusive. It simply states that the death was consistent with blunt trauma of the neck without any elaboration. Subsequently, in television interviews, the pathologist has stated that the supposed bruise that he found on the right side of the Johnson young man's neck was, he measured it between 2 and 3 centimeters, which is about 3/4 of an inch. That's the only supposed injury that he found. And he postulates that the cause of death of Kendrick was a blow to the side of the neck that struck a point where the arteries in the neck split, and that this caused his heart to stop. This mechanism of death, this cause of death, is actually in young people has never been described in the scientific literature, ever. It does not exist.
Tell us whether a GBI agent has reviewed the school surveillance video and whether it shows anything.
Yes, GBI agents have reviewed the school surveillance videos, and those videos do not show anything at all that would at all even suggest that someone else is responsible in any way for Kendrick's death.
What's the last thing it shows of Kendrick?
That he's entering into the gym himself, and that's the end.
What do you believe happened?
I believe that Kendrick lost a shoe that fell down in the center of this mat, and the hole clearly was big enough for him to get into, and he tried to go in after it. And because the size of the hole was relatively small, I believe it was measured at 17 inches, he went in head first with his arms extended, and he slipped down and was trapped there. And once he was trapped there, he could not get out.
That would be a freak accident.
Oh yes, that's a freak accident. And deaths like this are rare, but they occur. And any experienced forensic pathologist has seen deaths very similar to this over the course of their career.
I don't wanna let you down. Let you down, let you down, down, down. Let you down, let you down, let you down, down, down. Let you down, let you down, let you down, down, down. I don't wanna let you down. I don't wanna let you down.
Okay, Dr. Sperry, we all heard you. But isn't there a saying, pride comes before the fall? Well, I know you're not very proud of this. Most retirements are celebrated, but I don't think you feel the same for yours. An investigation was done on you, Dr. Sperry. For what I gather, you had your normal 9 to 5 as chief medical examiner, but then you also had a secondary job. And when your secondary job is the same position as your first, they call that moonlighting. And when this happens, there can be conflict of interest, of course. That was just some of the issue, not all. From 2010 to 2014, 67 days he stated he worked 8-hour shifts for his primary job for the state. But he actually spent time out of the office giving depositions or testifying in court for private clients for his secondary independent job. Filing false timesheets is a crime for state employees, with a penalty of 1 to 5 years in prison. Well, lucky him, the GBI only docked him about 5.5 weeks worth of vacation time and other accrued leave time to compensate the state back. But I think the most important part of that article was stating that basically he catered and tailored to his private clients' needs based on their case. As you can read in the article itself, one of the pathologists called Sperry's conclusions, quote-unquote, junk science.
Georgia's chief medical examiner, Dr. Chris Sperry's second job. Sperry was an expert witness, at times for accused killers, including a convicted cop killer in Tennessee.
It makes me mad.
Why?
It just ain't right.
I felt like we'd been sandbagged.
We found Dr. Sperry appeared to have violated GBI policy that prohibited him from contradicting other local medical examiners.
In my opinion, she did not die as a consequence of any abusive or inflicted injuries.
Including one high-profile murder case in which he contradicted the Gwinnett County medical examiner's findings. Testimony that outraged District Attorney Danny Porter.
I thought it was a conflict of interest then, and I still think it's a conflict of interest.
I told him to follow the agency policy and not to deviate from that.
Just when you think things can't get any weirder, KJ. But that's for that. Let's carry on. A few weeks before U.S. Attorney Michael Moore introduced his federal investigation, someone had anonymously donated $10,000 for KJ's case. It came from the Southern Christian Leadership Council chapter of Lowndes County. Pastor Floyd Rose represents the chapter and states there is no bias whether they believe he was murdered or if he died by accident.
Well, I believe that people sometimes will give up their mothers for money. And I think that this should have been done a long time ago. It has not been done, and we're doing it now because we believe that there's somebody out there who knows something.
But sadly, it was only valid for 90 days, and there had to be enough information for an arrest and conviction for whatever happened to Kendrick. So in late January 2014, it was off of the table. We did find out that the donator was businessman Ron Taylor. He was hoping that the family could find closure, but little did he know we were far from it.
Something and somebody will say something. They always do for money.
But don't you worry, it didn't take too much longer for persons of interest to come into play.
Two young men at the focus of the Kendrick Johnson controversy have declined to talk to investigators, a grand jury, and an on-camera interview until now. Channel 2 investigative reporter Mark Winnie live outside FBI headquarters in DeKalb County with these exclusive interviews. Mark?
And at last check, this case remained a focus of federal investigation. But we are outside the FBI's Atlanta field office because that is where we're told Agent Rick Bell was assigned, and both his sons are the subject of target letters from a federal prosecutor. And now we hear from them at last.
I'm going to ask my photographer to push in tight on your face.
Okay.
Our viewers can read your expression. Did you have anything to do with the death of Kendrick Johnson?
No. He was like one of my good friends.
Even at the time of his death?
Even at the time of his death.
You know, every word we broadcast of this is going to be scrutinized by the blogosphere, the Twitter sphere, and so on.
Yes, sir. It should be. And I want everybody to know the truth. And I mean, they can ridicule me and they can say whatever they want, but in the end, the truth will prevail. And everybody will find that me and my brother have been innocent and always will be.
I'll mention this. There's been rumors. And of course, jealousy does not discriminate age, race, culture. It affects everyone. And in the center of this could very well be a matter of jealousy. But we will see in part 4. Until then, stay safe, geeks.
Bet you never loved someone. Bet you never loved somebody like I just did. Bet you always hurt the ones you say you're so deep in love with.